We're here in Prince Edward County, Ontario, Canada, in my home studio to discuss the subject of contemplative photography. It's probably a term you're hearing for the first time or heard about it recently, although it's something that we've all done as photographers, probably since the first day you took pictures. We contemplate and even meditate and get into our subject deeper than just snapping pictures quickly. You try to build a relationship with your subject, whether it be an inanimate object such as a fire hydrant or a light switch. These are some of the photos we often see related to contemplative photography. Simple everyday objects viewed closely and carefully and very sharply to notice things that we've never really noticed before. The term miksung comes out of a Buddhist definition for good eye, and this is the elemental, the basis of what contemplative photographer comes from, meaning a new way of seeing. And it is something, as I say, when you first take a camera in your hand, you start to look at the world differently. I recall as a teenager at 15, I bought my first Pentax Spotmatic single lens reflex, and immediately I was looking at things, like my pet dog and my little 3-year-old cousin and in nature trails, and I was starting to see things very differently. It opened up a whole new world to me, and there were endless possibilities for framing things and finding the different lighting effects, the shadows, the form and texture, how you compose, and using different lenses, wide angle, telephoto. So we have the tools with our single lens reflex digital cameras, even cell phones and point and shoot cameras. You can capture the way your eye sees. It doesn't require a sophisticated camera. However, with more buttons and dials, we can control possibly what we see with depth of field and shutter speed, slow or fast, to achieve the look that we want. I would equate contemplative photography with an artistic style as opposed to journalistic or sports photography. I mean, there are many types of photography. Contemplative is sort of an umbrella over them all. It's training yourself to be present, to be intentional about how you record a scene. You could be in the midst of chaos in a protest in downtown city or in a sports activity, fast moving, and you can still go inside yourself, find that frame of mind that will help you pick out the very provocative scenes out of chaos. And you can easily go in with a wide angle lens and bam 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 and come away with decent reportage shots for the newspaper, but to really capture a scene with special meaning, it might be just the way you've interpreted the whole scene and zeroed in on one little part of it. It might be looking away from the action. For instance, if it is sports, you turn and you see someone in the audience or in the spectators, a reaction to a play in the spotlight. I've been in situations where all of the news photographers are corralled into a pool and they get pretty much all the same shot. However, if you're roaming around free without any accreditation, you're not the official photographer, but you can often nail a better shot of the event than the ones that are all put in one place, to get the scene that the media is controlled, by the political party that wants them to get that shot with the politician and the flag behind them. This way, moving sort of inconspicuously through the world, I think we can achieve more of our personal vision and using this contemplative technique. When we hear of Buddhist, we think of Zen and immersing yourself in the moment, being present, not thinking of the future or the past. And this is pretty much what contemplative photographer teaches. It makes us really relate to whatever scene we're in, whatever subject is with us, whether it be a human subject or, like I said, a vision, an environmental portrait. It's even been said by some contemplative photographers that taking the photograph is actually unimportant. It's which might sound a bit, way out there, like this is about photography, but more so it's about contemplating and meditating and in fact coming into yourself and knowing yourself better. You learn so much about your courage or the limitations that you have in certain situations. You also can express visually your life experiences and your knowledge that you've gained. Sometimes there's a pretty obvious picture if you're aware of the issues going on, or if you know that juxtaposition of things actually could be metaphorical for something much deeper and more important than just the objects by themselves. This is easier to represent in looking at the slides, and we'll go through some pictures that you can maybe determine if you believe they are contemplative photographs or not. And I challenge you to break out of maybe what you've seen in other videos about contemplative photography. It isn't just about close-ups of a zipper or paint chips on the wall or a hood ornament of an old car. I'm not criticizing these. These are great subjects, and we all love abandoned houses and broken down cemetery stones. But I think you can go even deeper than that and personalize it in whatever you photograph, whatever other life you have besides being a photographer. Immerse yourself in that world and capture things that have special meaning to you and possibly even make you happy. If you go out and you look for scenes that on a theme of whether it be happiness or some other emotion, you'll start to see differently again. And it is a good exercise to possibly just go out and look for things that are red, or make up your own theme. One theme that I've tried to impress upon my students is go out and look for things that are not perfect. For instance, we often want to photograph butterflies, and you look for that specimen that is just the perfect wings, and as it opens its wings they're symmetrical and colorful, and it's in the the perfect shape on a perfect flower. However, one time I got a photograph, this is back in the film days, and I looked at my slide, and I loved the way the proboscis was curled up and it had been on a flower, sipping the nectar, and however the wings were all tattered and torn. It was a fritillary, and it had the nice coloration, but it just wasn't perfect. And I think I set it aside, and it was like, that's a reject. However, as time went on, I looked at that picture and I thought, what, that one tells much more of a story about that migration journey, the literally hundreds and thousands of miles that these little paper-winged insects fly to the south each year. And that butterfly was a survivor. That butterfly with the tattered wings was more beautiful in a deeper way than the perfect, orange and black monarch with untattered wings. And so through contemplative photography, I've learned that there is a term for this called Wabi-Sabi, and it basically refers to imperfection, and training your eye away from what we think of as beauty toward things that are not naturally perfect and beautiful, but beautiful in a deeper meaning, in their lack of symmetry, or their brokenness, or their say, I think photographers always love to go into junkyards and see rust and broken doors on cars and broken windows shattered with lines going out randomly. And out of that chaos and brokenness, we as photographers compose the images with our creativity and our creative eye and way of seeing, that it makes our art out of the junk. And I think it's the same with abandoned houses and old buildings, bricks falling off and porches sunken in and barn roofs caving, broken beams. That's what photographers love. And it's probably because we can exercise our own creativity by cropping how we want and scanning that whole scene and picking out little gems for our visual interpretation. My personal project is sort of a merging of journalistic documentary and the artistic and contemplative style. It's called the Energy Documentary, and I've been traveling intentionally since 2009 to all parts of North America where energy is produced, whether it be the oil sands of Alberta or the offshore oil of California, or fracking for natural gas in Pennsylvania, mountaintop removal coal mining in West Virginia and Tennessee, and other areas where they've been protesting, energy and solar and wind, renewables and nuclear waste. So it's not a very pretty, it's not something you'd say is going to create beautiful images. However, I believe that it's in those, maybe in that ugliness, that we create a portfolio that actually is visual pleasing in a way that it makes us, the viewer, contemplate what the photographer has contemplated upon. I'll show, say, a mined mountainside in West Virginia, and it's just, dirt and rock and the seams of coal and trucks, and the forest has been torn down and the rivers are destroyed, and you might say that ugly is the new beautiful in terms of documentary photography. And in the past, I did cover acid rain in the 1980s for magazines Harrow Smith and Canadian Geographic, Time magazine, and Adirondack Life. And I had a tendency as a photographer to try to beautify the image. And if I was photographing a big smokestack, it was great when the sun hit it and there was a dark sky behind, and the big plumes of smoke were highlighted against that dark sky. In some ways it didn't achieve the drama that I would have liked, perhaps because I was almost making it look graphically beautiful. In fact, I wanted to show how horrible this was, this sulfur dioxide turning into sulfuric acid, dumping out on lakes in Canada and sugar maples and killing them. So as a journalist, I had to consider maybe not beautifying all of the pictures of disaster and actually trying to make them look as ugly as they were. So again, this is where contemplative photography comes in, that we understand the issues and we feel that this is a poison in our atmosphere, and instead of looking at it as a visual scene of light and shadow and form, we must go deeper into ourselves and how we feel, and interpret that visually to help others understand the issue. I like to speak to my students about purposeful photography. I think this goes hand in hand with the contemplative concept, in that we are looking for more than just a pretty picture that would win contests. We're looking for something that could actually change the world. And if you have an issue that you're concerned about, it might be animal welfare or homelessness, it could be environmental devastation, whatever it is, use that as a theme in approaching your photography and tell a story with it. one that might actually raise consciousness to an important issue that could actually, evolve into real change. Another thing is that I'd like to impress upon photographers is we really depend on things like heritage buildings, old covered bridges, nicely kept old churches and schools, and wild areas. Somebody is taking the time and energy to paint that old church and keep the roof on the old covered bridge and protect these things that we like to photograph. As far as wild areas, there are many organizations, the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife, any kind of environmental protection agency. It's up to us to contribute to these in some way, whether it be financially and as a donor and a member, or through offering our photography for their publications and trying to raise awareness and raise money to support these things that we actually depend on for our photography. So in some ways, we're cheaters. We steal the art. We call our art, what actually somebody else is partly responsible for. I often think of, when we photograph graffiti in a back alley or under an old bridge, we think of it as our art. However, really, it was that street kid or that homeless person who put the paint on there and designed that very urban environment that we photograph. So it's like contemplative photography often is looking at sculptures or architecture, and we call it, our photographic creativity. In fact, that was somebody else's creativity that we've sort of taken to another level with our photography. There was a photographer who took pictures for the great architect Frank Lloyd Wright, and he worked together with Frank Lloyd Wright for all his lifetime, all his career, because that photographer saw in the same way that Frank Lloyd Wright did in designing his buildings. So each one of them sort of worked off of the other in terms of they saw it with the same eye and appreciated the way the light enhanced certain angles and reflected off certain windows. And that's an example of a partnership in art and sort of a synergy where the two artists make it even greater impact with the photographs. So remember to give back to the places that we depend on for our photographs, and use your photography to make better change in the world. One of the key messages of contemplative photography is slow down in taking our photographs. Think more and immerse yourself more into the scene and live the moment. What better way to slow down than to shoot film? Now, shooting film is where most of us came from. I started in the 1970s, and contemplative photography was the way, because it cost me maybe 50 cents a frame to click that button. So we were very careful before exposing a roll of film that was going to cost you, $10 or $15 to get developed. And also the limit, you might have had a 12 exposure roll or a 20 exposure roll. I used to shoot 36 exposure Kodachrome, so I was very limited on how many frames I could shoot at a given assignment. Film, it is fun to go back and retro live the old film camera, and I bet you some of you don't even remember how to load one of these things. I had trouble last week when I was shooting a roll of film, and I got to number 14 and it gave me an error message just when I was framing a scene, and so I rewound it, obviously not wanting the leader to go back inside, and I'd have to go in the darkroom and pull it out. So I accidentally exposed maybe about 4 frames that I shouldn't have. So then I got it back on the spool and if you recall, this is what happens here. You lace it over. This is a Nikon F100, so it was really one of the better cameras at the time when digital was just coming in. And it automatically advances a couple frames, and I usually fire off another one just to be sure that it's not going to have that exposed leader. So I got my film back on the spool. I advanced it up to about 17 just to make sure I wasn't going to double expose the 14 frames that I had shot, and it jammed again. And you know, I had already hiked up a muddy trail, like probably for 15 minutes, so I went back down the trail and left the camera in the car before I was going on my hike. I didn't want to lug the camera all along. And so this is the inconvenience of film, and it makes us appreciate, you know, what we have now with digital. I mean, you can still have a corrupt SD card, but back in the day, film, you know, either it jammed like that, or it never wound on in the first place, and you shot 36 pictures and then you got 37 and 38, and you're thinking, wow, this is like a bonus roll, but in fact it never started winding and you didn't expose one of those 38 pictures. So the thing is, when it does work, it does tend to, you know, you feel like you're taking like really a precious photo. You take time and you don't want to just click them off. And even the feel of it, you know, the mechanical shutter and the mirror and the rewind, automatic rewind, it just has a feel of, you know, this is like a really precious picture I'm taking, and want to make sure that it's good. So if we think like that, even with our digital cameras and phones, it tends to slow us down, and not just go out there and like scan the whole world with the camera and bam, 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 and then delete later the ones that we don't like. It really makes us think about each and every shot, whether it's worth taking.